All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the That's Not Real Trek Watch Party podcast. I am your host, EBC Scotty. Below me is my beautiful co-host, the short and the sweet, also known as V or Veronica or Hey You. Uh, yeah. So you just showed me. Raise up your Star Trek glass again,
Oh,
and let's
yeah,
get
we
it.
have a set of these. I don't know where the rest of them are,
Oh, that's really cool. That's like a
but it's Star Trek 3,
okay.
and it's got a character on the opposite, so Falterpon, I
Very
think.
nice.
Falterpon? I don't know if I'm saying it right,
Now, I
but yeah.
also have somewhere around here a coffee mug that when you put hot liquid in, it's supposed to have the disappearing thing, and it shows like a Klingon warbird coming out of
Ooh,
cloak. Um, I've
cool.
kept that. But then my brother just gave me this for my birthday.
Haha, nice.
It's just a little sticker, but it's really cool. So I'm trying to find a good place to put that here where it's going to be more of a permanent thing. I don't want to, like put it on something and then, oh yeah, got to try to move it or something.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, yeah. All right, so this week we are looking at episodes 5 and 6 of Discovery. That is Choose Your Pain, which we most definitely will hear that phrase in the show. And I didn't look this up if it like the proper pronunciation for episode 6 is Leth or Leith. It's spelled Lethe. Um, I believe it's Leth, but we'll maybe listen and see if we can find if they actually say it in the episode and proper pronunciation on that.
Yeah.
So anyway, Choose Your Pain, we are going to be introduced to a new character, and I say new because this character has been there all along, but we didn't know who he was. But we will be introduced to him, and we will see what kind of a role he plays. So let me get this set up here. Do got that, and this thingamabobber here. There we go. Okay, we're all set, and we'll see you back here after episode 5.
Woo.
Aha! All right. So, there's a lot to take in that episode. So we've got first of all the Klingons seem to now be aware of the existence of the spore drive as a tool of the Federation. We have the captain is then captured because of that, Lorca, and put in a Klingon prison where he meets Ash Tyler, who is uh, a crewman who has been in prison for 7 months since the Battle of the Binary Stars, played by Shazad Latif. We also meet there Harry Mudd, who we have not seen since the original series back in 1966. He's aged beautifully. Played by Rainn Wilson of Office fame, and I thought he did a fantastic job of filling that role.
Oh, yeah, that was a great cast.
Yeah, and one that you didn't necessarily expect either. I mean, you know him for comedy in The Office, but obviously there's a little bit of comedy to this role that he's interjecting, but he it isn't necessarily something that you would have expected from him as an actor until he actually did it and just did a fantastic job with it. Not only what Harry Mudd was back in the original Trek series, but Rainn Wilson putting his own little twist on that and making it come alive was just great. Then we find out that using Ripper to power the spore drive is killing it, basically. And then we see at the end there, they let it go, and he's just like, "Woo, freedom!" And we also then have um, the revelation, more or less, that the engineer and the doctor are in a relationship. Now, this is the first time that we have truly explored in how shall I say, like full view, a homosexual relationship in Star Trek. It was kind of hinted at in Enterprise with the one character who never really had like any type of relationship, but it was kind of hinted at that he was gay. Uh, so, what are your thoughts on that being so brought to the forefront in this?
I mean, I'm not surprised that they've done it now and haven't in the past, because in the past it was more taboo and now it's more accepted. I think kind of universally. Um, I think a lot of people gripe about it because they're pushing it on us.
Yeah,
And I don't see that they're pushing anything like that on us. It's just that, like, there are people in gay relationships, and now we're showing that on TV. Like,
right.
I don't think it's forcing an agenda in any way.
Well, for the longest time, see, because I've actually known a lot of conservative and politically active people in the last 15 years. And I also get, because of that, the people that I've known in that time, I get to hear a lot of what their side of that story is. And what they feel is that nowadays you see so much representation of LGBTQ relationships in TVs and movies that they feel their values of traditional marriage being the best way to do it, or in accordance with God's law, or whatever way, that's an affront to all of this. And then they, like, even some of my family members are like, yeah, I don't think I really want to see that, it just it's not right, or whatever thing they come up with. And uh, to me, the most crucial part of that they failed to be they failed to recognize, is that back in 1966, the original series was the first television show to have an interracial kiss between William Shatner and uh,
Michelle.
Nichelle Nichols. Yes,
Mhm.
it had never been done before, not even in
Right.
movies. I mean, even in there was a movie in the 50s called "Guess Who's Coming to Dinner," and that was a white woman dating a black man, but they didn't actually show a kiss on
Mhm.
screen because it just had never been done before. Star Trek broke that wall, that
Right.
glass ceiling, and said, we're going to do something that has never been done before. And they were highly criticized for it back then. So anybody that wants to take the tack that this isn't real Trek because they grew up with Star Trek, and this is just, pushing LGBT values and all that, whatever else. You seem to forget that they said the exact same thing about the original show 50 years ago.
Right. And it didn't even show them just they're brushing their teeth. Like,
Right. Yeah.
it's not
It's not.
showing them
It's not like.
having any
Right.
physical anything going on. They're brushing their teeth together.
Right. And like, somebody that I knew that was a big Star Trek fan, especially the original series and Next Generation, I mentioned that to him, that there is a homosexual relationship in this, and he's like, yeah, I don't think I'm going to want to see that then. And I'm just like, Oh, okay, fine. Um, so this is where I also want to bring up. There was a podcast that you had suggested to me that I can't remember the name of it. Do you remember what that was?
Oh, newbie Star Trek.
Newbie Star Trek.
Yeah.
And it was basically three guys, only one of them very or semi familiar with Star Trek, going through the episodes one by one and explaining it to that, from a newbie perspective. I actually dropped listening to that podcast after a while, not because um, it wasn't good content or something like that, but because the creators of that podcast could not stop themselves from injecting their personal politics into every single aspect of this. And just for me, it became too much because I don't want to deal with politics on that kind of level anymore. And it seems to me that they were of the mind. This is one thing they got absolutely right, which is that Star Trek over the years has definitely pushed the boundaries of what is socially acceptable in addition to addressing the issues of our time. Like not William Shatner, Gene Roddenberry specifically put storylines into the original series that dealt with political and world strife issues that were going on at that present time. I mean, even the movie Star Trek Six: Undiscovered Country was just an example of what was going on between the United States and the Russians back during the Cold War, and that was Star Trek's take on how do we as a people deal with these issues that are going on in the real world right now. Same thing. Um, Pushing boundaries by putting in controversial material that probably isn't really all that controversial, except for a bunch of people right now that are making a mountain out of a molehill, and in 30 years nobody's going to think anything of it, you
Right.
know. And we'll look back and say, yeah, that really was real Star Trek because that's exactly what they've been doing from the beginning.
Well, I think now it's a little different because back when they were making the original series and even with Next Generation, I think that the issues they were tackling were it was a little more veiled, and they tried to not come outright. This seems like it's a little more forthcoming
Hmm.
and in your face, like here's the issue we're dealing with. And I wonder if that is causing a little bit of the friction that, before it was kind of hidden, it was kind of hinted at, it wasn't put so direct.
Yeah. Possibly, and just in general, it seems like this entire series and the direction that Paramount and CBS have been going with all this newer Star Trek content is a little more edgy, a little more in your face. Um,
Yeah, they dropped the F-bomb.
yeah.
Whoa.
Oh, yeah. That was the other thing. I nearly fucking forgot it, man. Yeah. We haven't had any language except for, I would say, damn, in Star Trek the entire time. And I remember, I mean, this was one thing, but it was far worse when in Picard. I don't know if you've seen any of Picard yet.
Not yet.
The one admiral drops the F bomb in front of Jean-Luc Picard, and I remember unbelievable firestorm. Oh, oh my God! How could they possibly do that in Star Trek? And I'm just like, geez, shut the fuck up, really. Um, Again, all the multiple problems that people see with these new Star Trek series, to me, it's in their heads the inability to get over it's not going to be exactly what you wanted from whatever series you liked in the past, you know? Um, yeah, so they dropped the F bomb. Big fucking deal. It's like
We say that all the time.
Right. And I do think in a big part, or in a big way, a part of it is that the fans of Star Trek, at least the old guard fans, I'll use that term, old guard, the people that were there in the 60s, and that were there in the late 80s and early 90s, and after a while they just decided that it was so far and different from this legacy thing that they had in their minds all those years that they just don't like it. um, and Also that they came from another generation that was much more uh, not willing to cuss, or not willing to talk about things that were controversial, or sex stays in the bedroom, we don't discuss sex at all. They were also probably not so happy with seeing Jerry Ryan in a skin tight silver catsuit.
I don't know. I don't think they minded that so much.
Yeah, that's it. No, that's fine. That's fine. We can
Yeah,
get
fine.
past that. All right. So yeah, lots of. I mean, obviously the story in. Oh, that is an unpopular. Some hobo in our chat said that Jerry Ryan didn't look that good in her catsuit. You can get out the fuck out. Anyway, so the storyline in that episode was much more, I think, of introspection. Like, we got to learn a little bit more about the characters and how they were internalizing things and dealing with it. Like, we saw Saru struggling with Burnham being in his face, and how he would deal with that in his acting captaincy. We saw Stamets struggling with trying to find a solution for this, and his ultimate solution was to put his own life on the line in order
Yeah.
to do what the captain required of him. You know, and in the meantime, he makes his significant other wonder about his mental status until all is revealed. Um, so yeah, lots of reveals, lots of feelings, and I think that because of that, the storyline, and we had uh, the storyline of Discovery going after and trying to save their captain, and the captain in the prison dealing with all of that, and the introduction of Ash Tyler and how they dealt with that whole scenario. So these two storylines, but more of the focus, I think, was put on um, how each individual person was dealing with the scenario and the situation that they were thrust upon in that episode. So, did you have any other thoughts on that?
I think it was really well done. You've got a lot of those character pieces. You've got a lot of those relationship building things. They're setting things up, and you've got action, and you've got mystery, and you've got a lot of elements kind of interplaying that it worked really well together.
I think that's one episode, like, that's the, or one of the kinds of episodes that you want to go back and watch again. Because it's
There's so
certainly,
much.
there's probably 10 billion little details that you don't pick up on until you see it again 2 or 3 times, and then you're like, oh yeah, I missed that.
hmm
Because they do put so much into the little pockets of the storylines there. But we're not going to do that now. We're going to move on to episode 6. Leth or Leith, I'm not positive which it is. Well, we'll find out here.
We'll listen for it.
Yeah. All right. See you in a bit. All right. Well, yeah. All that and a cup of tea. So, what'd you think?
That was a lot. But I don't love that we completely shifted off of the Klingon storyline and just had that little speck at the end.
Um, Elaborate on that for me, because I'm not quite sure what you mean.
Well, it's just kind of jarring, you know. They're like they're doing the tardigrade, they're doing the jumping through space. They've got the Klingon war going on, and then all of a sudden, we've got the Sarek storyline, and we're focusing mainly on that. And now we're introducing the Admiral and Lorca's relationship, and it's just it didn't seem to flow from one episode to the next.
Okay. So maybe a throwback to the episodic style that was
Yeah,
in so much of Trek. We had this constant flow now through episode 5, and now all of a sudden in episode 6 we're going to take a break from all of that, and
right. Big shift.
yeah. So I see what you're saying there. Um, I feel like, except for that little snippet at the end, they really didn't advance the story much, aside from giving Lorca more of his backstory.
Mhm.
Like, we heard about his previous command in the last episode, and in this episode now we know that Lorca and Admiral Cornwell have a history together, at the very least friends, and they either re-engaged as a couple or stepped it up in this episode to now explore that bit. Um, it seems to me, yeah, they were maybe friends with benefits before this happened, and maybe things like got swept under the rug as they went different career paths or whatever, or maybe it's a, whatever, they see each other get together type of thing. Um, Knowing what I know about how this season ends, I think they did that on purpose in order to try to give you a better perspective on where Lorca comes from.
Okay.
So like for much of this episode, Admiral Cornwell, especially the part where she just kind of like shows up on Discovery unexpectedly and is showing this concern and fear for Lorca, what she's trying to express is that what he's doing is not the Lorca she knows. So I think that was the creator's attempt to try to fill you in more on the backstory of Lorca. And so,
Okay.
so yet again, we've got a plot and a subplot. The main plot is that Sarek has been is barely survived an attempted murder uh, by the Vulcan. Oh, what was the term for that? Not separatists. The isolationists, so to speak. They basically thought, and you heard, in his dream sequence when he's talking to the administrator of the school, that they cannot um, stand basically these intrusions that Sarek is doing with humanity into the Vulcan sphere, and that is, marrying a human woman, having a half human, half Vulcan son, and now caring for an Earth or a entirely human, and trying to get her into the Vulcan Science Academy. Um, so the first thing I want to mention here, logic extremist. Thank you. I couldn't think of the term. So the first thing I want to mention here is that one of the things that I've seen in my exploration of Star Trek story and lore is what you may or may not be familiar with, the Shatnerverse, where William Shatner wrote a series of 9 books that are supposed to be the continuing adventures of Captain Kirk along into the 24th century. Um, and in that one, at least one of those books, he explores this fight that Spock is having with logic extremists that are basically saying we don't want to have anything to do with the Federation anymore, get rid of the humans and everybody else, we just need to be Vulcans by ourselves. And I believe that's where they got the premise for this storyline, to show that the logic extremists existed also in Sarek's day, also in prior to all of that. You see in episodes of Enterprise the logic extremists that are existing way back in that day when Earth was just now finally getting out into space exploration. Um, so they wanted to explore part of this with the logic extremists, and um, the biggest part of it was Sarek trying to compensate for this failure where he tried to get both of these kids into the Vulcan Science Academy. They basically told him, you have to pick one or the other. He chose Spock, and then gets Burnham into Starfleet, but then Spock says, fuck you, I don't want to go into the Vulcan Science Academy, I'm going to join Starfleet. And he's like, oh, gee, great, it was all for nothing.
I chose poorly.
Yes. Um, and that really is tying into how Sarek views this entire situation now that he's having to face being murdered by a logic extremist that's part of the diplomatic corps, the same diplomatic corps he's in. That was another diplomat that was joining him on this expedition. Um, and I think the subplot of Lorca giving Cornwell pause, or not even pause, but alarm almost, at what his actions are doing is all part of the same thing that will be leading up to the end of this season, and what we will be seeing in the storyline for that. So I agree with you. However, I believe it was the creator's attempt to give you all of the necessary background information, not only Lorca and what he's doing, his relationship with Cornwell, Sarek and his relationship with Burnham, and all of the things that are relevant and beside all of that we're seeing now that will lead into that finale. So the other thing I wanted to hit on in this is this is the first time that we're really getting, like, we understood that Sarek had adopted Burnham. We've never heard of this before this series, and this was part of the big thing that people get all up in arms about with That's Not Real Trek is, what do you mean Spock had a half-sister, or, this and that? We've never heard any of this malarkey. Why are you just making up, new stuff? And if you go back and you watch the original Star Trek with Mark Lenard as Sarek, there are little hints that he had more children than just Spock. We know for a fact that he had at least one other child with a woman before Amanda. That's, Sybok from Star Trek V. And we didn't find that out until Star Trek V. But if you listen to the language Spock uses in Star Trek V, when he's responding to Captain Kirk going, I know for a fact you don't have a brother, that particular language and the language Sarek uses in the original series, there's definitely the potential for other children. It's just never necessarily mentioned. So, when you first heard about this, that they were developing a storyline to portray Burnham as Sarek's, surrogate child, that he's basically raising this, orphan, how did you react to that?
Uh, honestly, the first time I heard about it, I kind of didn't like that they went in that direction. Um, because you would think that it would have been mentioned before. But I think they're doing a good job of explaining how they had two completely different paths. So, maybe during their childhood they spent a lot of time together, but, teenage years and into adulthood, they didn't.
They didn't. And see, I don't, again, I don't know how far you saw into this, but that's explained. And
Okay.
I think they absolutely do a fantastic job of explaining why we haven't heard about Burnham before. At least in the context of the relationship of her being essentially a sister to Spock, a daughter to Amanda, and a daughter to Sarek. Um, so obviously there's no bloodline there, but they raised her as their daughter up until a specific point. Now, we also saw in that dream sequence uh, the Burnham that was in the dream sequence as part of the memory was essentially, we'd say, like a 18-year-old. She's just getting out of school, trying to enter the Science Academy, which would be the equivalent of college. And they had Sonequa Martin Green play that role as well. In the future episodes here, we're going to be introduced to a teenager who is playing uh, a teenager version of Burnham. And yeah, um, so that relationship, more specifically between Spock and Burnham, and how that all happened and why it is the way it is today, is going to be much further explored, especially as we get into season 2. Um, so yeah, we'll just leave it at that. Any other thoughts on that before we wrap up?
What did I write down? The Stamets thing. They kind of like lightly touch on he's much lighter. He's kind of making jokes,
Mm-hmm.
and but then they don't go back to it.
No.
It's right there in it's in the beginning of the episode, but then they just kind of leave it. And they had the creepy thing with the mirror at the end of the last one, so we're just kind of like, what? What is happening?
Yeah, they only very lightly touch on that. So something is definitely off with Stamets, at least the way they're
Yeah.
portraying it. We have no clue why he would walk away from the mirror and still have his reflection standing there, grinning real creepy and all that. We don't know
More
why.
horror.
Yeah. Um, and we also don't really have any understanding of why this personality change. So that also will be explored. But you're right, that's a tinge that of the storyline that they only have peeked a little corner up to give us a small sneak peek at. Um, and I also think now I know Anthony Rapp that plays Stamets from Rent, which is by far one of my favorite musicals. Uh, um, what's the other guy's name? I can't remember. The guy who plays the Doctor was also in Rent.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Although they didn't play a couple. So Anthony Rapp in Rent, he was kind of like the lone guy. There was 3 relationships around him, and he was single. And one of the relationships was the black guy, and well, this guy's black too, but um, Angel is the name, and I think
Yeah.
Angel dies of
Hmm.
AIDS by the end of the movie, and that's who that is. The
Okay.
the one who played Angel is the Doctor here, Culber. And that was part and parcel with the production of Discovery, is that they definitely wanted to explore uh, LGBTQ rights and homosexual relationships, and that's why they cast Anthony Rapp, and I can't remember the other guy's name, because they were part of this crew in Hollywood that did this in a lot of different films, and Rent was only one of them. So they knew that was going to be part of the storyline moving forward, that they wanted to explore these kinds of relationships, and these guys had done such an excellent job in previous movies and on stage as well, doing that exact same thing, exploring these relationships and trying to give it a face. And I thought they did an excellent job in this as well, trying to explore that. Um, so that's pretty much it. I think we're all set then. Then next week is episode 7, Magic to Make the Sanest Man Go Mad, and episode 8 that has a weird kind of Latin type name, CSI, Vis Pacem Para Bellum. And that phrase was used earlier in this episode, which it was in the beginning of the dream sequence with Sarek, where he was talking to this intruder, Burnham, that was appearing in his mind. So at some point, I would suggest going back to the beginning of that dream sequence and listening very closely to his dialogue there, because that will hold clues to what we're going to see next week. Alrighty?
Okay.
Anything else?
Good. That's all I got for tonight.
Perfect. All right. Thank you very much. We'll see you next week.
Bye,
Adios.
everybody.